Hello and welcome to this session. I'm very happy to have you back, Dr. Alexandria Onuoha. Sorry. Um, Uh,
You said it
uh,
correct.
I did. Okay, I'm just gonna take a deep breath just with names. No, I'm genuinely grateful your approach about joy as a solution to harm. So without further ado, genuine thank you for coming back again this year. And I'm very much looking forward to this session.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So welcome to my session. So today we're going to talk about cultivating online joy spaces to disrupt youth violence and really moving beyond the firewall, right? To explore how joy can be a disruptor, even though it is a positive emotion. So I'm coming from the field of developmental science. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But after this session, in the next 30 minutes, you're going to understand joy as a critical feature of resistance for youth of color. But also, we're going to name the harm and violence online and in person that targets youth. So we understand that online safety is real because it has material consequences for in person, right? So we're going to start naming some of those multiple systems of oppression, right? And then identifying co-creation opportunities for youth to develop these joy spaces online, right? So what does that actually look like? What are some examples? So that's why I'm here. I'm going to give you some of these examples that I've used in my work or also relied on other peers or other youth practitioners that have done this work. So, to understand why we're looking at joy as a safety strategy, it helps to understand the lens I bring to this work. So, I operate at the intersection of three roles. So, a creative, an educator, and a developmental scientist. So, my approach includes digital safety and it includes a consideration that young people are ever evolving, right? And we have to understand a holistic ecosystem of a young person's life. I look at like a few core pillars. So one is Black joy and kind of ties into resistance. So for youth of color in particular, existing in a state of joy is a radical act. It is a form of resistance that disrupts the narratives of trauma often forced upon them. And this applies to a lot of youth, right? Of thinking about some of those deficit-based narratives or what has been said about young people. I talk with my students all the time about what have you heard about the period of adolescence, right? And sometimes they'll say, "Oh, that we're lazy, that we're disruptive," right? So Black youth in particular use joy as a way to counter those narratives, but also to think about how do we exist amid our socio-political climate. And then also as someone who has a background in dance and psychology, understanding the power of co-creation, being with others, positioning young people as producers of knowledge, as experts, as digital architects. So, as a researcher, I use this kind of approach when engaging participants in a research study and working with youth practitioners in particular to design programs. So, by centering these pillars, we move from being kind of like a digital police, but to being architects of liberation. To build something toward joy and online safety, we have to be real, right, about what we're actually fighting. Violence isn't just one thing, it's a web where everything is connected. So we name the harm so we can dismantle it. There are so many forms of violence, but here are a few that I think we can start with, right? So online violence, like this is the one in the spirit of why we're here at the Shield conference, right? It's when people use the internet to shame, bully, or degrade others. And specifically, we can even think about, you know, experiences such as misogynoir, like the specific hate and prejudice towards Black women. And Dr. Kay Coghill, who is also a speaker at this conference, has done amazing work on thinking about this. And then we have physical violence. This is the most clear for a lot of us, intentional harm to someone's body. But we have to remember violence often leads to violence in the streets and vice versa. These aren't really separate worlds. Like all of these things are connected. And then we have political and structural violence, right? This is what I tell young people. This is the big picture stuff, right? It's when systems or laws are used to control or intimidate entire groups of people. It's the firewall that keeps certain people out of power. And then lastly, sexual violence, right? This is about power and control over someone's body or identity without their consent. When we name these harms, they lose their power to hide, right? By understanding that these four corners, right? And this is just, there's so many other forms of violence, right? And these are just a few that I'm naming right here. But we can start to build counter stories, which young people's own visions of and ways of being are at the center. If the online space is full of hate, we build a joy space to reclaim it. If the structural facet is trying to keep us down, we can use our creativity to kind of jump over it. And we'll talk a little bit about how in a sec. So we just named the four corners of violence. But how does that violence actually find its way into your DMs, like for my young people, or your gaming, channels, right? Your gaming chats. It happens through a process called recruitment in spaces such as the manosphere, where big harmful ideas, like fascism in particular, are disguised as a joke, right? And we could talk a little bit about how these groups and individuals actually work, right? They don't start by asking you to join a movement, they start by offering you a false sense of community. So, in particular, if we think about far recruitment online chats, and gaming, the groups go where you are. So, Discord, Twitch, and gaming chats, they are looking for young people who feel lonely or frustrated and offer them a sense of community, right? They use humor and memes to make hate feel normal. And as someone who is in the field of developmental psychology, right, what we know from the research is that the adolescent period is an exciting time, but it can be scary because young people are searching for a sense of belonging. They are going through physical, cognitive changes. They are navigating peer dynamics. And people that want to harm young people or promote youth violence understand this. Um, and then how it connects to fascism, right? At its core, fascism is the belief that our group is better and their group is the reason for all of our problems. So this is a key ideology within far-right recruitment. And in digital spaces, this looks like picking a target, usually people of color, specifically women of color, and blaming them for everything. And this is kind of where we get to this idea of digital misogynoir, which is the specific tool they use. This is one way in which, or one strategy that the far right or folks that don't believe in a multiracial feminist democracy. They don't believe that people of color should be in power, making decisions, or allowing for us to have joy, right? So the reason why it's important to name misogynoir in particular is because it is a central pillar to these movements and harms the most vulnerable group when it comes to online safety. And I always say that if we can find a way to protect Black girls in particular, everybody wins. So fascism needs a villain to survive, and recruitment is how they get you to help them create the villain. They want to turn your search for identity into a weapon against someone else. And we can choose to build spaces where belonging doesn't require um, someone else to be the victim. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked a little about the forms of violence. Let's talk a little bit about the scope of the problem, right? This idea of the firewall, the risk model, right? So a firewall is like a digital no trespassing sign. It waits for a threat to show up before it acts. But if the threat is already inside the community, disguised as a friend or a meme, the sign really does nothing. So groups often they don't send malware, right? They build social ecosystems and they create an us versus them, right? And in the chat, if you can, or you can reflect on a piece of paper some of the examples that you've seen of this, right, online. And to the youth in the room, you know this, you can't block the feeling of wanting to be a part of a group. And for my educators and for those that work directly with youth, a firewall can block a website, but it can't block the human need for identity and wanting belonging, right? And I think that's kind of the distinction that I want us to consider as we begin to think about co-creation, and having more empathy for young people in particular. So if we can't just block our way to safety, what do, right? We flip the script from, deficits or risk model to an asset-based approach, right? So I offer us to think about joy and other positive emotions. A joy space is not just a temporary escape, right? It is an environment intentionally, right, designed to support long-term psychological health and community well-being for young people. It is a place where we locate and we can map out methods towards thriving, right? So a joy space, and I think I'm still like working through the definition. So I actually encourage you all to type in the chat or reflect on your own. What does a joy space mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the objects around? Are you reading something? Are you drinking something? Are you drinking tea? Like really envision it. And it's not a form of escapism, right? It's for us to really think about a joy space should be normal. We should be actively creating these spaces for young people physically, right? But also, how do we create these things online? How do we showcase our joy online? So, a youth led joy space creates a social environment where radicalized youth violent rhetoric feels cringe, outdated, or irrelevant to their actual lived joy. So, if a hacker or a recruiter finds one crack in a firewall, the whole system is compromised. It's a once and done defense. However, when someone tries to use a hook, like a hateful meme or toxic joke, a young person with a strong digital, let's say, immune system, or someone who has actively created a joy space, they recognize it immediately, right? And we want to be able to say, this doesn't fit here. This isn't who we are. So really a cultural shift almost. So we want to think of it as protective and an iterative process, right? Which means it's continuous, it's evolving, and it allows young people to curate their own visions of liberation and freedom. And what does it mean to be a young person in this current socio-political climate? And we move from surveillance, watching from harm, which is important, right? We do that, but to also move towards building resilience through identity, humor, dance, right? Posting photos, going back to the spirit of playfulness in child and adolescent development, right? So I want to talk quickly about some co-creation strategies. And then I'm actually going to invite you to also think about this as far as where you are located, where you are positioned, whether you are an educator, a young person, someone who is interested in this idea of joy, and moving from deficit-based thinking. So one way in which I've done this, particularly with Black girls who I work with, mapping and locating joy, right? Instead of adults looking only for red flags, partner with youth to identify the green flags, which are the digital spaces where they feel most safe and joyful, right? Like actively asking them, like, are there certain creators, are there certain people that are creating content that you really resonate with, that maybe there's someone that looks like you? And ask youth to show you three memes, creators, or servers that make them feel seen rather than surveyed, right? So this is this idea of mapping and locating joy, right? We're kind of building that foundation because young people are super brilliant, and they know exactly what they need, as far as belonging. And what we want to do is start, planting those seeds for them to receive the messages of joy so that they can locate it for themselves. And then also another strategy is this idea of an infrastructure for agency. So instead of adults building a fortress to keep kids in, right? We build a space for them to lead. We create programs and we position them as experts and we position them as digital architects, right? So practitioners provide the secure platform. So let's say it is, a Google site that you create or some form of a moderated hub. And there is a social justice or mental well-being framework that is attached to it, right? So how do we move towards joy spaces and social justice away from recruitment, away from harmful ideologies that are, let's say, rejecting, just the diversity of children and families, essentially, right? And then we step back to let youth define the specific mission. We also, and this is from my own perspective as someone who researches joy among children, we actually have to start asking children how they define joy, right? Like that kind of gets part to this planting the seed, right? And we build that infrastructure for them to lead within that definition, right? Within their own lived experience. And then another strategy is to think about flooding the algorithm, right, with their own definitions, right? And experiences of joy to disrupt the negative feedback loops of the algorithm. So this could be a collaborative session, which I've done with Black girls in particular, where youth and mentors curate or create original art poems and joy images specifically designed to be shared and engaged with. I have done this several times with some of the girls that I've worked with, particularly in Boston. Um, and it's been really helpful to not only see their definitions and hear it, but also just to see the creativity and how they explain it. And I think what tends to happen is within academia or within us just being adults, we tend to put forth our own ideas and we tend to put forth our own definitions of how things are should be. But young people are also theorists. Young people are also theorists, and they have their own visions for what joy is, and we can ask them this, but also give them the space to go outside, take pictures, participate in this poetry slam, participate in all of these art-based activities. And this is kind of the artistic uh, version of me speaking here, right? But these are also methods that are backed in science, right? There's a lot of research within positive psychology and child and development about the usefulness of art methods in playfulness and joy, right? And joy being an indicator of learning, right? Another strategy that is an extension of curating the algorithm and flooding the algorithm with their own definitions is digital photo voice and zine making. So instead of adults telling youth this content is bad, right? That's part of it. We should be sending those clear messages. And we also empower youth to document their own digital joy and identity affirming experiences, right? So photo voice is a methodology that I tend to use in the research, but you don't have to be a researcher or to do qualitative research in order to do photo voice. You can literally ask young people to go outside and take photos of what joy means to them, of what safety means to them, right? And you can collect those photos, you can post it online, right? And this is a way for us to continue to feed the algorithm with these messages, right? And youth use photo voice, right? They can also compile them into like a digital magazine, right? And this also could be not just their photos, but it could also be some of their storytelling, some of their poetries, some of their thoughts, right? So it's just a way for us to um, use art-based methods in a way that feels really good for youth and allows them agency. And I think in particular with educators, we have our pedagogy tools and this is how things are done, which is great, but kind of leave room for playfulness, leave room for flexibility as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about this idea of digital dance performances as online joy spaces. So in the beginning, I had talked about my experience. So when I was in college, I double majored in dance and psychology. Psychology, I often tell people psychology gave me the language to think about how to study race in a scientific way, how to study things like online safety, social media in a scientific way. Dance kind of gave me this idea about curating space and joy, but also gave me the language to name systems of harm as well. There was an article that was published from one of my colleagues and one of my friends, Dr. Gabrielle Kubi, and her colleagues um, around witnessing Black girl joy in digital spaces. And I think this is an example of um, this idea of an immune system being in action. So within this study, and it's one of my favorite studies I like to share with students and just uplifting the work of other people doing this work. So for Black girls, participating in digital dance challenges, for example, isn't just about getting views. It is a performance of Black girl joy in a world that often tries to police their bodies or silence their voices. Dancing online is an act of reclaiming their space and their narrative, right? When these girls create together, they are building what the authors of this paper call digital joy spaces, right? Um, this is who we are, this is how we move, and we are beautiful, right? And as a creative, this is also me. This is a picture of me, I should say that. As a creator, I've also been able to physically dance and then post it online to alter the algorithm in a way. So I also think about um, dance and art messages, and I know some young people are like, I don't want to put my stuff online, which, very understandable. But I do encourage young people to use their power and to use your voice to change those narratives. And as educators and as adults, if we can provide an infrastructure for youth to lead, that makes all the difference. And this is an example of disrupting the harm as well, right? This is how we disrupt things like far-right recruitment, misogynoir, radicalization. When a young person is busy co-creating a world rooted in their own brilliance and shared culture, the hooks really have nowhere to land. There's no room for a toxic vibe, right? When the space is already filled with joy and connection, right? When someone tries to enter in, young people are like, this is odd, this is cringe. Absolutely not, right? For educators, this is a call to turn our gaze instead of seeing TikTok dance as a distraction, see it as a survival strategy and a tool for community resilience. Like use that in your classrooms, use that in your community organizations, and kind of altering our thinking about what we think the adolescent development period should be or what it's usually called. Also want to share this quote with you that I've been thinking about lately. And I have a resource sheet which I'll share, and this has um, the book. So this is by Tracy Lewis Giggets, her book Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration. And she writes, our joy and our trauma both sit on a continuum. There isn't one or the other. There isn't a binary. The complexities of our experiences mean that our joy can live just underneath pain. In fact, it can live alongside it. I find this quote to be powerful, and I encourage you to also share your thoughts about this quote as well, right? And I think at first glance, it could seem as, okay, well, how is joy going to get rid of this, right? And it's important to understand that these are methods, right, of moving from a deficit-based framework and risk to asset-based approach, but also within what Tracy is saying here is it's not that there is a binary, right? They both are existing. And right. And what I think as educators and adults, we have to figure out how can we have joy amid our current struggle, amid online violence. And I just love this quote of, in fact, it can live alongside it. So I do want to leave you with one final thought too. So I think we may have time for questions, but I want to leave you with one final thought. So for too long, we've tried to keep our young people safe by building bigger walls, and it's important. We focused on this idea of a firewall, on what to block, what to fear, who to keep out. But a wall can only keep things out if we can't put anything meaningful like in. If we want to truly disrupt violence, we have to stop acting, in fear, right? We have to start acting like digital architects. So to the educators and families, a part of your job is to watch, the parameters, right? But it's also to help clear the ground so that youth can build. And for my young people, your joy is not a distraction. Your creativity is resistance, and you can cultivate online spaces on your terms. So we don't defeat hate by just making it disappear. We defeat it by making it irrelevant and really moving towards a culture shift, right? By building a world so full of belonging, full of this sense of togetherness and so full of joy, there is simply no room left for anything else, right? And that is the goal. So if you have any questions, or if you want to stay in contact with me, this is my email. I have a QR code here, and I can also put the resource, I can have the full link in the chat. But take a look at the resource list. There's a lot of great things there that I have used before, that some of my colleagues have used before. Um, and I think it'll be helpful. But again, reach out if you have any questions. I know I only have 30 minutes, and the professor in me wants to keep talking, so I'm going to stop.
No, it's always amazing to hear your work. And I really thought of a lot of as you were talking, how this really can reach. Like this is the concept of joy is different for everyone. And that's the beauty of it, right? If you you really pursue it in this organized way, then you find your own joy. The communities can find their own joy, the young people. Um, yeah, I'm really looking forward to expanding this more among, as we
Yeah.
said, among the other members, because there's a lot of stuff has come up. We were talking about it before. Um, Unfortunately, we do have to close a few minutes early because I have
Yes,
to
it's
let the
okay.
next person in, unfortunately. But
It is okay.
we will definitely, it's just amazing every time. And we'll definitely be in touch to have focused, thinking how we're going to get more people to approach this because it's desperately needed. For people, the resistance has come out again and again, and in many different sessions over
Yeah.
these last 2.5 days. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for being here again.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And again, if anybody has follow-up questions, I feel like 30 minutes, isn't
Yeah, I
always
know. Next
enough.
time I have to reconsider this 30
It's
minutes.
okay. It's okay. It
Okay.
actually forces me to keep my points
Mm.
concise. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.